Yes, the Taliban has recaptured Afghanistan, specifically Kabul, after the longest and most costly war in American history proved a worse failure than those of us who marched in the streets against it could have even predicted then. The last couple of weeks, the Taliban have been advancing, taking city after city, as the United States had a pretty swift withdrawal, and they've recaptured them. And then today on Sunday, Kabul fell and President Ashraf Ghani departed Afghanistan. Here he is. All right. We're waving, we're saluting, we're goodbye. And my work is done. That was so easy. So that was President. One more wave. Yeah, could have done some peace signs, but we didn't get the peace signs. Well, I feel like we need to just roll credits on this now. Just kind of like, ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. Obviously, there's a lot more to say, but I have been livid about this all day. Just the unconscionable amount of failure, given all the money, given the $2.23 trillion, which is definitely on the low end, the amount of fraud and waste, the bloodshed, the refugees. And the military, the so-called, the trained, U.S. trained military, Afghan military, was not able to resist any of this. And there's a lot of reasons why. I'm just going to go through some tweets that I saw and appreciated from Zishan Alim, who I believe is a freelance reporter with MSNBC. He writes, the reason Taliban fighters are succeeding is not because they're crushing Afghan security forces. It's because the security forces are not fighting. Why? Afghan security forces have been working out deals of accommodation and surrendering quickly during the conflicts with the Taliban because they're not properly supported in terms of logistics, reinforcements, and supplies. They don't have a sense that costly fights are worth it. He goes on, the U.S. has built a security apparatus in Afghanistan that could never fend for itself. Experts like Adam Noah Hu explain that the U.S. has built an Afghan security apparatus that over-relies on U.S. support and a small set of Afghan special forces. The upshot is that Afghan security forces were essentially destined to be overrun when the U.S. left. That is a failure of U.S. policy. I was going to bring up a photo of like the head of the Taliban leaders sort of basically in parliament running stuff. But it was, anyway, I'm sorry. They were very much like, we in charge now. I dare you to say shit. But thoughts, responses to this news. Jennifer, how you feeling?
It's devastating. It's devastating for the people of Afghanistan who've endured decades and decades of warfare and occupation and passed the hat. And it's for the women in Afghanistan who are now being left to what kind of fate under Taliban rule. Like, this is absolutely unacceptable and heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nando, what were your reactions when you saw this happen so quickly?
I mean, I guess the reality is, I mean, there's all these people, like kind of security analysts and policy experts and stuff talking about the so-called failures of U.S. policy in Afghanistan, and I just think that's it. It makes you believe the fiction that had the United States done something slightly different, if they would have just implemented some other tactic or something, it would have been better. The reality is that the U.S. occupation had no social base in Afghanistan, and the fact that the government, whatever that was, just evaporated as soon as the U.S. stepped out means that there was no social base at all. If there were a social base, there would be people that were there willing to defend it, but there just wasn't. And to call what the U.S. did in Afghanistan is a failure is, I think, kind of missing the point. It's like you believe the fiction that the United States actually wanted to do something or some sort of good thing in Afghanistan, and what they really did was like a transfer of wealth of like $2 trillion from taxpayers to the owners of weapons manufacturers. I mean, like the bearded Chomsky like yelling at you like, it's the corporations, man. Like, that guy's like broadly right, and that guy is right, and that's what the Afghanistan war was for 20 years. There was no. It was to think that we could have done something different and built like a stable, humane, situation in Afghanistan is just imperialist. imperialist hubris, like, to think that we have not just the ability, but the right, the moral obligation or whatever to do something in some far-flung place in the world, just misunderstands the nature of how imperialism works. Like, if you're not willing to do it, like, meaning like kill a lot of people and like occupy a country forever, like it's never worked, and it's never going to work in any human society ever. Like, there will be resistance. People don't like to be occupied. People will fight back. And that's what happened in Afghanistan. I mean, I just think that the only humane thing that the United States could have done in Afghanistan, I think I supported withdrawal, forever. I opposed the war when it happened, but I supported withdrawal forever. And the only humane thing that the United States could have done is a robust refugee policy where we would have just let in, like, as many people as wide as they that would have been the humane thing, to, like, offer
free flights,
to the United States
they're
for all the victims.
Treat it like they're Cuban refugees, somewhere escaping socialism.
Totally.
Come one, come
like
all.
That, exactly, like that. And that guy who's talking about, like, the United States created this, relied on so-called Afghan special forces. The Intercept just a few months ago did a massive investigation about these so-called special forces, and really what they were these death squads that were just murdering children in schools. And, like, they documented dozens and dozens of massacres in schools that these CIA-trained death squads were carrying out on, then you wonder why the Taliban has more of a social base.
Totally. And you're seeing, like, oh, Warlord X or Warlord Y departs Afghanistan. It's like, what do you mean warlord? Like, yeah, because the U.S., instead of the Taliban, of course, was just turning to warlords. Warlord, not better than Taliban. Like, how does this make any sense? But that's what we did. And one of the best books on the Afghanistan war, I've already talked about Restrepo on this podcast. I've done 2 hours on Afghanistan. If you want to look that video up, called "How Was the Afghanistan War Not a Giant Money Laundering Operation?" I think that's what the title of that video was. Watch that. It was great. We looked into the economics, the amount of but projects that were clearly just to get some contractor rich. But this book called No Country for Good Men, I believe it's called. No Good Men Among the Living. Sorry, No Country. No Good Men Among the Living by Anand Gopal. And he had this to say in response to this Washington Post reporter saying, "I can't understand how a force of over 300,000 with an annual budget of $3 to $4 billion, equipped with Humvees, MSVs, helicopters, A-29 fighters, and advanced weapons, is crumbling so quickly and easily. An entire army corps surrendered to the Taliban in Kunduz today," WAPO reports. And Adnan says, because fancy equipment can't provide legitimacy, which the Afghan government and its foreign backers have not had for a very long time. And that's exactly to the point that Nando was making. You cannot force liberation on a people, and to say that is also imperialist. And so I'm feeling very conflicted personally, because it's not about me, right? I am not in the crosshairs of the fallout of this, but I did march against this war, and I was told time and time again by my country, think of the women, think of the children, think of the civilians in Afghanistan. This is why we have to go in. This is why we have to bring all of our weaponry into this country that we don't even know where it is on a map, right? Because 9/11, but liberation, but the freedom, but okay, that was shoved down our throats. And so now I've got to muster the same, I have to dust off what is the propaganda of war from real empathy for the people of Afghanistan who've been so dicked around, who've been so deceived, and who've been, displaced, murdered, lied to, etc. That is, I'm trying to hold that is safe from the U.S. war machine propaganda, that is safe from the, fucking former generals writing open op-eds in the New York Times right now about how we should have gotten out differently. Or we just wait longer. Oh, do it differently. It would have been the same story, fast or slow. It would have been the same. I'm done. I'm just so done with this. I'm so done with this war. Give it to China. They're going to invade pretty soon. Every superpower invades Afghanistan.
They're too smart. They're not going to do it.
Yeah, but I'm curious about the U.S.-led businesses that have spent the last 20 years building pipelines for oil and gas through Afghanistan, and what's the shakedown of all of that? How is that going to play out for our interests?
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time there dicking around, and honestly, it's like I don't understand how they could have like strategized this pull out any worse for the people on the ground.
I think that it's.
Yeah,
I was just going to respond to that quickly and just say, I feel like this withdrawal, it feels like when you're breaking up with somebody that you shouldn't be with anyway. You had a bad relationship, the whole thing was bad, or fundamentally things weren't going right. And then when you break up, they say something terrible to you, or they're kind of an asshole, and you're like, we shouldn't have been together. Like, it's the same thing. Like, there's no like loving good way to get out of a bad relationship. It usually just kind of ends bad. And that's what, like, there's no good way to get out of a bad war. That's what I firmly believe. And I know that's controversial. And I know it seems like if we had gone slower, what would have happened? There would have been more firefights, more people dying. That's part of the reason that the president did leave to avoid bloodshed. So I can't see how we could have done this better. But I do see going forward how some reparations and some actual assistance to Afghans on the ground could potentially help. What we should have done in the first place. Sorry, Nando.
No, I just want to point out that you mentioned the women and children in Afghanistan. That's a line that you see from a lot of the NatSec types and the generals and things like that who want to justify our continued presence in Afghanistan. And I would always get so annoyed because it was such a cynical use of that. Like, it's like they're almost like using women like human shields, because they don't give a shit about the women of Afghanistan. They really do not give a shit about them. Like, if they did, they would do this. They would do a humane refugee policy to relocate them to a safe place. But that's never on the cards. I just want to point out that in 2019, the Washington Post published something called the Afghanistan Papers, one of the biggest leaks of Pentagon documents and cables and things like that. Basically came and went and no one noticed, but it was huge at the time. And it basically said that literally every single thing we heard coming out of Afghanistan, from the Bush administration to the Obama administration to the Trump administration, every single bit of information that was coming out from our government in Afghanistan was a lie. Like, all of it was a lie. And Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut did like a whole little tweet thread yesterday. And when she was like, I was a part of a bipartisan delegation that went to visit Afghanistan in 2011 to observe how Obama's surge was going in the countryside. And we went to this village and we talked to some of the elders. And we asked them, like, what's the deal? And they were like, well, the Taliban used to raid our crops. And now, because the U.S. security forces are here, we still sell our crops to the Taliban, but they at least pay us in full. They don't, like, just steal them. And we were like, that's great. And then Chris Murphy was like, oh, cool. What do you grow? And he's like, oh, look, this is my giant poppy seed. Like, they're basically, like the U.S. security forces, they're basically protecting a heroin trade that blossomed in Afghanistan after the U.S. invasion that was not there before. And so everything about this was just so absurd, ridiculous, cynical. The justifications for the prolonged presence were always like incredibly hollow and thin. They didn't actually believe any of that stuff. The only thing that mattered was that we kept going and that we kept sucking out, resources and money and manpower, basically to fuel the U.S. war machine, which is just a perpetual moving thing that unless someone like, bless him, Joe Biden, just pulled the plug. At some point, you just got to pull the plug, and it's going to be painful, and there's going to be blowback, and there's going to be people
the
at
blowback.
Home.
The political blowback is really interesting, right? The right is going to have a field day over this, even though if Trump had won, he would have done the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. Trump, in fact, kudos to Trump. Trump was the one who was going to get out of Afghanistan first. He said we were leaving first. It's like the only thing that I'll give him a shit cookie for. Jennifer, any final thoughts on this?
I'm not saying that that I believe, that we should have been there, or that I support this being an ongoing thing. But I do think there is going to be a huge brain drain. I think there's going to be like consequences for people on the ground, and I think it's going to suck. And it's like, we should. No, none of the propaganda that we were espousing to stay there or be there in the first place is at all legitimate. But at the same time, it's like, now we've left these people on their own devices, unprepared, and I just think it's not gonna end well for them.
No.
Yeah. No, and I just want to say that, I'm particularly bitter about this topic, but again, I do think that there can be a road forward. I mean, I guess it's such an example of internationalism that fails when it comes to, international militaries trying to liberate people, and send a few troops from Italy, a few troops from the UK, troops from Australia, just a international war, occupation, liberation. See how that works? And I think that the people, and I know this feels woo-woo, but I'm going to go there. The people have a different internationalism to show, and that I hope we can bring on to this podcast, but that we can also share resources of actual organizations that aren't like low-key USAID covers, or like some kind of like neo-colonial, CIA, but like actual things that are supporting groups on the ground who are who are trying to live under the Taliban. And look, to be fair to the Taliban, which they don't deserve, but supposedly they're going to like write a law where women can like serve in government, and which they have been. Afghanistan's got like a pretty very diverse parliament, or did. So like, who knows? Maybe they're going to turn over a new leaf. I'm not holding my breath, but I'm just saying, like, we can't also come to this with an imperial mindset, even though we don't, like, we don't have to, they don't have to be our BFFs, but we also have to respect some amount of sovereignty. So anyway, all that said, it's fucked up, but hopefully we can, going forward, really support the people on the ground and circumvent our government, which has been so monstrous on this. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/bitchuation room. Do